have fractions. No big deal. The same principle applies even when we have fractions and decimals. First step, see where the equal sign is? There you have your left and right hand side. Once you have the left and right hand side, then what you want to do is go through the steps, simplify. I can tell you that there's nothing to simplify. This, even though it's a fraction, is considered a constant. This is a variable, and this is a constant. Remember, these two are not the same, and this cannot be combined because they're on different sides. If it's confusing to you, remember, grab your piece of paper or your cloth, cover up. No, there's nothing like once I cover up. No, there's nothing like when I cover up. So once you're done simplifying, labeling, well, the only side that has a letter happens to be over here, so that's easy. You can only have one side variable, so the other side must be, by default, constant. Now, notice this is your variable. This, since it's subtracted, is a constant. So to move it, because we have a constant side, we do the opposite. So you're going to add 3/4. Add 3/4. Remember, whatever you do to the right, you have to do to the left. A negative 3/4 and a positive 3/4 cancel out because they're inverses. 9/4 plus 3/4. Again, some of you might have forgotten that when it comes to adding and subtracting fractions, you must have the same denominator. Luckily, this is 4, 4. Notice it stays 4. It doesn't become 8. When you're doing fractions, we think of this as sizes. So I have 9 size 4 shoes plus 3 size 4 shoes. That means I still have size 4 shoes. Think of it as a label, the denominator. All you're doing is collecting the numerator. So positive 9 and a positive 3. 2 positives you add, we're going to get 12. Once you get here, 12 over 4, you're going to see if you can simplify. Most of you probably go like, oh yeah, 12 divided by 4 is 3. Notice that there is no coefficient. N is by itself. This is technically solved. Now, someone asked me the other day, do you need a calculator in this class? I say, you don't have to have a calculator, but we do recommend it. If you're not good with fractions, then I told a lot of people to buy this calculator. There's a picture on it under the announcements. This is a great calculator because I can put in the fraction. Some people might not know how to use your calculator. So for us, the 9 is the numerator. There's an ABC key right here. This ABC key acts as your fraction. And then put in the denominator 4. Then just do your operation, plus, and then the numerator again, which is 3. And this ABC key, that's our fraction key. And then the 4, that's our bottom. And it'll simplify and tell us that it's 3. All right? So I know some of you might need just practice on a calculator if you're not good with fractions or anything like that. And that's fine. You're allowed to have a scientific calculator for any quiz or any test. Cannot be a graphing calculator. Make sure it does not say multi-view. Okay? The rules are on the syllabus. Make sure that I recommend the 30XIISS. You see the picture that's on your announcements. But as long as it doesn't say multi-view, and I think it has to be a number for Texas Instrument less than 34. So it can't say Texas Instrument 83. That's a graphing calculator. That's a no. Right. Let's do one of these with a decimal, just to show you decimals don't really change things up. Again, wherever you see the equal sign, you have a left and a right hand side. You ask yourself, can you simplify? Over on just this side, even though it's a decimal, it's a constant, variable. not like, cannot combine. Over on the right-hand side, this is just one decimal number, so that's a constant, nothing to combine. Labeling, var, because it's the only side that has a letter, which means this must be constant. This 3.1 needs to move, because it's not a variable, so the opposite of a positive would be a negative. If I do a negative 3.1 here, I have to do a negative 3.1 here. These cancel out, so I get A. And then hopefully you know that a positive number and a negative number you subtract. Use your calculator if you have to, or if you're doing it by hand, 5 from 0 is 5, 2 from 1 is 1, 6 from 3 is 3. Who wins the tug of war? 6 players or 3 players? Team 6 wins, so it's going to be a positive 3.15. Let's show you a tricky fraction problem. Ones where we have it as a coefficient. So let's say we had 1/5 p. So now I have a fraction for a coefficient. Before I showed you fractions with constants. Well, we're still going to do this first step the same. You're going to divide this left-hand side, right-hand side. You're going to label one side variable, one side constant, because there's nothing to combine. We can't simplify. We don't have any parentheses. That's what we're going to learn in 2.2. And this coefficient and a variable, they're not the same, so keep them separate. And this is just a constant. So if I label this side variable, this is the only side that has a letter, and this side constant, notice that this is a coefficient. So it's not like I'm going to subtract 1/5 to both sides. To get rid of a coefficient, we normally would divide. But we put a little mark down here. The reason why we put a mark down here is because if you remember from your good old days of fractions, you're not allowed to ever divide by a fraction. If you're dividing by a fraction, what you always had to do was multiply by the reciprocal. So if the coefficient is a fraction, instead of dividing like we normally would do, we're going to multiply both sides by the reciprocal. Now reciprocal is a fancy way of saying flip the fraction upside down. Flip. So notice we're not going to divide since this is a coefficient. If you have to put a little star here to remember, oh yeah, we can put a little star here too, so that you remember this little rule, saying, oh yeah, this is where if I see a coefficient that's a fraction, we have to flip. So flip this. Instead of 1 being on top, 1 goes on the bottom, 5 goes on top. And we're going to multiply. Now for multiplication, you'll see me do this a lot. Parentheses is our multiplication symbol in algebra. So if I do this on the right-hand side, or on the left-hand side, I have to do the same thing on the right-hand side. So how do you multiply? Some of you can just multiply top with top. 5 times 1 is 5. 1 times 5 for the bottom. And then 5 divided by 5 is the same as 1p, or p. Others are my cross cancelers. You say 5 on top, 5 on the bottom. 1 on top, 1 on the bottom. When everything cancels out, it's not 0. There's a secret 1. And then 1 times p is p. So how do I take care of this side? Notice I have a fraction, and this is not a fraction. Anytime you have a whole number, if it helps, put it over 1, so that every item is a fraction. Fraction, fraction. So now I just multiply top with top. -4 times 5 is -20, remember? Because we're doing the divorcing step, tic-tac-toe board. And then 1 times 1 is 1. And then -20 divided by 1, we get our final answer of p equals -20. So we did have a little trick here because we technically are not allowed to divide by fractions. So anytime you see your coefficient as a fraction, just remember that you have to multiply by the reciprocal. Let's do 2 more of these, and then I'll come back with some trick problems. So let's try x over 4 equals 6 and 2/3 d equals 6. So for this guy, notice the trick. I have the equal sign, so I have the left and the right hand side. But when I go into my simplifying, what is this? This 4, does it seem like a coefficient? Well, the problem is, if you think the coefficient is 4, that meant it looked like this, 4x. This is where the coefficient is 4. So this is a coefficient, but it's technically not 4. How do we rewrite this so that it's not as confusing? See how there's no number next to x? Remember how we said that 1 times x is x? We can go backwards. Instead of saying x, we can say in front of any variable, there's an understood 1. The reason why I do that is because now I can take this and shift the x over. So I can put the 1 over 4 here and just shift the x over. By doing that, now you can see the coefficient is not 4, but 1/4 or a quarter. Right? So anytime it's unclear when you have a random 4 at the bottom, separate by moving this over, and then if there's no number on top, put a 1 so you can clearly see it better. Because once you do it that way, this looks just like the problem that we just did. We're going to have variables on one side, constants on the other. Remember, this is a coefficient, this is a variable, nothing to combine, nothing to move. So we're going to go right into the divorcing. Because this is a fraction, we have to multiply, not divide, by the reciprocal. So this would be 4 over 1. And then we'll do this side by 4 over 1. So either do a cross, 4 over 4, which is 1x or x, or cancel, 1 on top plus 1 on the bottom, that matches, you get x. Over here, since it's a whole number, you can put it over 1, because 6 over 1 is the same as 6. So that way we can do top was top, 6 times 4 is 24. Bottom was bottom, 1 times 1. So we know our answer is going to be 24, because 24 divided by 1 is 24. For this other trick guy, remember, coefficient is a fraction. So just like we did here, but notice the d is away from the fraction, instead of divorcing, we are just going to do the reciprocal. So flip this, flip over here. Multiply top with top, 3 times 2 is 6, 2 times 3 is 6, 6 over 6 is 1, so you know that this would just be d. Or if you're my cross cancelers, as long as there's something on top that matches something on the bottom when you multiply, it still becomes d. Over on this side, remember, if it's a whole number, put it over 1. You want to have fraction times fraction. You don't want to do whole number times fraction. Make sure it's fraction times fraction. So you know that this 6 will only multiply with the top number 3. So 6 times 3 is 18. 1 times 2 is 2. And then you know 18 divided by 2 is 9. Okay? So those are the ones with the decimals and fractions.